Hello and welcome back to Intro to Programming. So what we're going to talk about today is how to start moving things around the screen. All right, because so far we've sort of had things pop up on the screen and we've made our tags and we've made our text and our pictures and everything else, but they kind of show up where they show up. And we haven't really had the ability to move them around and get them to be in specific locations. Now, you played around with this a little bit in the CSS lab, but you may not have understood exactly what was happening. So that's what this video is going to go through. It's going to talk to you about how to position things, how to center things, so that you can use those skills when you're working on your own website. Because sooner or later, you're going to want to move something around, and this video is going to help you figure out how to do that. All right, so the file that we're working with is positioning.html, which just has these cute animals on it. And you'll notice that as I scroll down, different things are happening. All right, so some of the pictures are just scrolling as you'd expect them to scroll. Some of them are staying right where they are. Some of them start moving. And then once I get to a certain point, they sort of get stuck. And then we've got some stuff down here that we'll talk about a little later. We're going to talk about this when we want to center things. All right, so let's take a look at the code underneath. All right, this is what we're visually seeing, but the code is underneath. So again, if you've got the file open, you can just right-click and choose Edit with Notepad++, but I already have it open right here. All right, so if we look down at the HTML first, we'll start there. There's just basically some text. BR is line break. All right, so that's just like hitting enter a bunch of times. I just use that as a quick and easy way to get some space. And then here are my pictures. All right, so I've got this one that says class relative. I've got this one that says class absolute, but this is my giraffe, my hedgehog. Class fixed, which is my panda. Class sticky, which is my pig. And then I've got a div tag down here that has another picture inside of it. And then I've got some line breaks. And then down here are the two monkey pictures and then another div tag with the word hello in it. All right, so let's kind of go through these one by one so we can see how they work. All right, so we'll start with the picture giraffe. All right, now the comment above this says this lets you move the image from wherever it would have been placed by default. All right, so right here, when I made my image tag, this is where the giraffe showed up. It showed up right below the heading cute animals, which makes sense because here's my heading cute animals. And then the first tag I have after that is the giraffe tag. So by default, that ends up right underneath cute animals. Now, if I go up to my style tag, you're going to see that I have one entry for image. So this is what's making all of my pictures the same size, 200px by 200px. And then I have the different classes. So this is only affecting the ones that are class relative, only affecting the ones that are class absolute, only affecting the ones that are class fixed, only affecting the ones that are class sticky. So that first entry is only going to affect the giraffe because that one is class relative. So what do we have here? All right, so we have this position attribute. Now this position attribute is usually either going to be relative, absolute, fixed, or sticky. And as we just said, relative is the one that moves it from its starting position. So once I say position relative, I can now use the commands top, left, bottom, and right. All right, top, left, bottom, and right will not do anything unless you first set the position attribute. All right, so I've set the position attribute to position relative. I can then set a top or a bottom. I wouldn't set both. I set one or the other. All right, I can then also set a left or a right. Again, I wouldn't set both. I would set one or the other. So let's look and see what happens if I change this number. All right, so let's say instead of 0px, I change this to 100px, and then I hit save. All right. If I go and refresh this page, what you're going to see is that my picture shifts down. And what that just did is it added 100 pixels of space above my picture. So when I specify a number on top, it's actually going to move the picture down because it's adding that much space above the picture. Now, a couple of things here. I can also put in a negative number, all right? And I can say a negative 100 pixels, and then that'll actually move it up. Or what I can do is instead of specifying top, I can use bottom. All right, so again, you use one or the other, but not both. And if I say a bottom 100 px, all right, you're actually going to see that it hasn't moved. All right, because bottom 100 px is equivalent to top negative 100 px. All right, I'm adding 100 pixels of space to the bottom, which has the effect of moving it up. And again, if I made this even bigger and I said 200 px, all right, that's going to add even more space to the bottom of my picture, which is going to shift it up. And then I can start doing the same thing with the left and the right. So let me bring this back to 0. So I could add, 500 pixels of space to the left of my picture, and that's going to push it all the way over to the right here because I've added all this space to the left of my picture. If I were to say right 500 pixels, right, that's going to add space to the right of my picture, which is actually going to push it right off the screen. So you can't even see it here. But let me use a smaller number. Let's just do 50 px. And then you'll see that it shifted it just a little bit to the right. So effectively what's happening here is when you say position relative, all right, it moves the picture from its starting location. So wherever it would have ended up by default, we can then move it from that default. And again, we can specify either top or bottom, but not both. And we can specify left or right, but not both, right? But it's kind of moving it from that initial sort of starting point. So again, this was the initial starting point, and then we could move it from there. So let's take a look at the next one. So if we look at the next one, it says, this will be positioning from the top left corner, and this is my hedgehog right here. So let's take a look at what absolute does. All right, so when I change it from position absolute, instead of moving it from its sort of starting location, it moves it almost from, you can almost think of it as like the screen. So this is saying, when I say top 0px, left 0px, that's basically saying put it in the top left corner of the screen, which is why my hedgehog shows up here in the top left, even though technically it was the second picture I added to my page. So by default, you would think that it would actually end up right next to the giraffe, but because I used absolute, I'm moving it from the browser window. So I said top left, and that makes the browser window sort of the top left corner there because I did 0, 0. As far as moving it, it works the same way. If I were to say top 100 px, that's going to add 100 pixels of space from the top of the browser window and shift the picture down. If I say left 100 pixels, right, that's going to add, that's going to add 100 pixels of space to the left of the browser window and shift it over in this direction. Now, the top and the left are going to work a little different when you're doing absolute. If I change this to, let's say I change this to right. All right, it's no longer, I mean, it's still adding space to the right, but if I were to say right 0px, this now means that instead of working from the left-hand side of the browser window, it's now going to be moved from the right-hand side of the browser window. So when I say right 0px, it's going to instantly move the hedgehog over to this right corner, which unfortunately is hidden behind the panda. So let me actually add a little more space here. All right. And then what you're going to see is that by saying right, it actually moved it all the way over to the right side. And now I'm moving it not from the top left corner, but I'm moving it from the top right corner. All right. So when you're doing absolute, left 0 pix is going to put it all the way on the left side. Right 0 pix is going to put it all the way on the right side. So you can kind of use those if you're trying to get something on one side of the screen or the other. There's no reason to like use left and try to shift it all the way over to the right. Just use right, and then you can shift it a little bit if you needed to have it a little offset. So maybe you don't want it flush up against the edge of the browser window. You know, we could say right 50px, and whoops, I just accidentally opened Paint. And then when I refresh this, it's going to shift it from the right-hand side as opposed to shifting it from the left-hand side. And again, I can also change and use bottom instead of top. So if I do that and then I refresh it, you're going to see that it ends up in this different spot here. All right. Now, why it's ending up there as opposed to the bottom of the screen, that gets a little more involved, and we're going to talk about that in a second. All right. But I'm going to just switch this back to top. Put it back in the starting spot. So 0px, 0px, and left. And again, this is doing it off the browser window. So this is going to put it right up the top of the browser window, and it's going to put it all the way to the left of the browser window. All right. Absolute top 0px, left 0px. Oh, I didn't save it. That's why. There it goes. Now it's back. Now, what you'll notice about this page is that I actually have 2 hedgehogs. So the question is, if I have 2 hedgehogs and absolute is doing it off the browser window, why aren't both hedgehogs ending up in the same exact spot, one on top of each other? All right. The reason is that absolute doesn't actually do it off the browser window. It does it based off what's called the parent element. Now, if your image tag isn't inside of anything, then the parent element becomes the body, which is effectively the browser window. All right. However, if you have your image tag inside of something like a div tag, all right, the div tag becomes the parent element, and then I'm moving it inside of this div tag. So this second hedgehog is at 0, 0, but it's 0, 0 inside of the div tag, not 0, 0 inside of the body like this top hedgehog is. So just be aware of that. If you are trying to use absolute and you're like, wait a second, why isn't it ending up in the top left corner? It might be that your picture is inside of another tag, and then the positioning is not happening relative to the body tag. It's happening relative to the parent element, which in this case would be this div tag that we have right here. All right. So again, I don't know how often that's going to come up for you, but it is good to be aware, because sometimes kids are like, wait, I set position to absolute. Why isn't it ending up where I thought it was going to end up? And again, because if it's part of another tag, it's going to be referenced to that tag, not necessarily the browser window. Whereas when it's only inside of the body tag, it's effectively the browser window there. All right. So those are our first 2. We've got relative and absolute. Again, relative is positioning based off where it originally was. And then absolute kind of throws that out and says, all right, let's just position off, in most cases, like top left corner, top right corner, bottom left corner, bottom right corner, so on and so forth. All right, so it's going to allow us to kind of move things in an absolute manner just around the screen versus relative to the original position. All right, so next, that becomes fixed. So fixed is our panda. So let's look at what happens with our panda. So our panda is the picture that always stays right there in the top right corner, no matter what I do or no matter how much I scroll up and down. All right, so you can think of fixed as, instead of fixing it on the website, it's almost like it's fixing it on your monitor. All right, it's going to stay in that one position on your monitor no matter how you move around the website. So no matter where I go, it's fixed to that one spot on the screen. All right, so again, here I have position fixed, and then I've got top 0 pixels, right 0 pixels. All right, so again, I could change this and I could go, all right, let's make this left 0 pixels. Okay, and if I do that, now the panda's over there and it's going to move with me as I scroll. So this actually gets used a lot for like browser bars. All right, when you're scrolling through a web page, a lot of times the links will stay up top at the top of the screen so that you can always quickly get to those links. All right, that's accomplished using sort of fixed positioning. It makes it so that even as we scroll, we can have something stay right here at the top to make it really easy to use over and over and over again. All right, so again, just another sort of option that we have available to us. All right, and then we can also, just like the other ones, instead of doing top and left, we could do bottom, right, and then that'll stick it there in the bottom right corner. And again, it's behind my face, but there we go. It'll just stay in that one spot. So if you wanted like a footer that stayed in the same spot even as you scrolled, you could do the same sort of thing there. All right, so again, fix just kind of allows you to almost fix it to a certain spot on the monitor. And then as you scroll, it stays in that spot no matter what. All right, now the last one we have is sticky, which is our pig. So let's see what happens with our pig. So what happens with our pig is we start scrolling down and it's moving, just like the giraffe is moving. And then when I get to a certain point, we see that it gets stuck in place and then it acts like the panda. All right, but then once we go back up, we get to a certain spot and then it goes back to acting like the giraffe. So what exactly is happening with sticky? It's sort of a mix of relative and fixed. So the image will be relative into a certain point, at which point the image becomes fixed. So right here, what this is saying is let the image move, and then when the image arrives at the height of 0 pixels, then let it get stuck in place. So that's why when it reaches the top of the screen, it then gets stuck where it is. All right, if I were to say top 100 pixels, all right, when it hits that 100 pixel mark, then it's getting stuck and shifting in place. All right, so again, just another way to sort of modify how your page works. You know, if you have something that you want to slide it first, but then stay with the user the rest of the time, you can use sticky to sort of accomplish that. So just a quick sort of rundown of what we just did there. All right. If you want to start moving things around the screen, you have to start with the position attribute. All right, top left, bottom right, all of that stuff does not work unless you specify the position attribute. So you're probably specifying it to either relative, absolute, fixed, or sticky. Relative means you're using the starting location of the element and then moving it from that starting location. Absolute means you're referencing it off the parent element. So if the parent element is the body, that usually means like top left of the screen, top right of the screen, bottom left of the screen, bottom right of the screen. But you're basing it off of the parent element and then moving it off of that from either top, left, bottom, or right. You've got fixed, which is where you're kind of fixing it to a specific place on the monitor so that even as they scroll, that one thing stays in that location. And then sticky is sort of a mix of relative and fixed, where it'll move until it hits a certain spot. And then once it hits that spot, it will get stuck in place. All right, so again, all of these different tools can be used to sort of move things around the screen as needed. Again, you would never have a top and a bottom. It's one or the other. You would never have a left or a right. It's one or the other. And again, these won't work unless you first specify the position attribute. All right, so let's go down and talk about centering now, because a lot of times kids are just like, how do I center the picture? What's the easiest way to center the picture? All right. Now, what you want to notice about image tags is that if you put two images right next to each other, they don't end up on separate lines. They end up horizontally, which is different than a lot of other tags. So for example, if I put in two paragraph tags, and I said hi, and then I put in a second paragraph tag, and I said bye, you'll notice that these two end up on a separate line. All right. So they behave differently. All right. The image tags are what are called inline. So they end up one right next to each other. The text tags are not in lines, which is why they're blocked, which is why we're getting two separate situations here. So why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant when we're talking about one of the ways we can center. All right, so one of the ways we can center is we can use a command called margin auto, all right, which basically balances the margins on both sides of the object, which has the effect of centering it. Unfortunately, that doesn't work when something is in line. So to get margin auto to work, we have to first say style block. All right, and by making it style block, all right, each picture will get its own line. And then when it has its own line, then we're allowed to balance the margins. All right, so I could say style block, margin auto, and then that will have the effect of, whoops, what did I goof up? Style block, margin auto. All right, let me pause this for a second because I'm missing something that I didn't do. All right, that didn't work because I had a brain fart. It's not style, it's style equals. We're not reusing the word style. This is display block. So I apologize for that. That's just a brain fart. Display block margin auto. All right, and then when I refresh this, now you're going to see that this first picture is centered. All right, so one way, if you're just looking to center a picture, is to change the display to block and the margin to auto, and then that will center the picture. All right. Another way to center the picture is to use what we were using up above, but instead of using pixels, use percentages. All right, so what I could do is I'm going to take this second picture and I'm going to hit enter here. Now, again, that won't actually put it on another line. It's easier for me to do it this way so that there's some space here to see. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a few different things. I'm first going to say position relative, right? Because again, if I don't set the position attribute, I can't use left or right. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width, instead of to a pixel amount, I'm going to set it to, let's say, 20%. So I want the picture to take up 20% of the width of the screen. What I can then do is, instead of using left and right in pixels, I can use left and right in percent. Now, if I want the picture to take up 20% of the screen, that means there's 80% of the screen left over. And I want 40% of that to be on the left-hand side, and I want 40% to be on the right-hand side. So if the width is 20, the left is 40, and the right is 40, altogether that adds up to 100%, which is going to have the effect of centering this picture. So again, this is another way I can do it. I can say position relative. I can pick my width. And then based on what I pick, I have to set the left to the appropriate value. So if I had picked a width of 50%, I would have set the left to 25%. If I had picked a width of 10%, I would have set the left to 45%. But it's just so that it's balanced. And then when I do that, you're going to see that it's centered the picture on my page, because this is taking up 20% of the screen, and then I've got 40% here and 40% here. All right, so it's another way of centering my picture. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about here today is text tags. Now, I already said that the display for them was block. All right, now what you'll notice is that right here I have, actually, sorry, this is a div tag. The div tag by default takes up the entire width of the page. All right, if you want to center the tag, you first have to change the width. So again, this is a problem of, if I try to use margin auto for this tag, nothing's going to happen because the tag is taking up the entire screen, so the margins are already balanced. But if I go and I change the width of this tag, so let's say I change the width of this tag to 200px, right? Now you can see that, all right, the tag does not take up the entire width of the screen, and the margins are unbalanced. There's a much bigger margin on the right than there is on the left. So now if I go in here and say margin auto, right, then it's going to balance that space, and it's going to have the effect of putting that block in the middle of the page. So you just have to be careful, because things that are display block by default are taking up the whole screen. And this is a div tag, but the same would be true if I made this a paragraph tag, right? By default, this is taking up the whole screen. So unless I set up a width, margin auto is not going to do anything. So again, if I get rid of this, all right, you're not going to notice anything has happened because it's taking up the entire screen. The only way to get something to actually happen here is to first set the width. Only by setting the width is this actually going to have any effect. So if I set width to 200 pixels and then save it, then you're going to see that now it does have that centering effect on it. All right, so again, this is not anything that you're going to have to do a lab on, but you can think of this as sort of a resource when you're working on your website project. If you need to move something around, all right, this kind of walks you through some of your different options. And if you're trying to center a picture, you've got this down here to kind of walk you through and show you how to do it. All right, so again, I hope this was helpful. Have a great day, and I will see you when I see you. Bye.